Well, good morning. Thank you for your time today. It's wonderful to be able to connect with you all. I'm happy to see so many familiar names on the call, as well as many new attendees. Today's discussion is designed for everyone. For those who don't know me, I am Bruce Anthony, and I'm one of the trainers with Service Technologies. Before we jump right in, I want to make sure that you know that I have several colleagues on the call today who will be able to answer your questions via the Questions tab, which you should see under or next to the hand-raising icon. So please feel free to ask away throughout the webinar. They will answer your questions directly, but they'll also pass along questions to me that they think will be useful for the entire group. I also want to note that if you have to leave before you receive a response, our customer support team will reach out to you after the webinar. And one final note before we begin, you may already be aware, hopefully you are, but we do have all of the past webinars recorded and available on our YouTube tutorial channel. We'll look at this later at the end of the time here today. But you can access that by going to video.servicetech.com. We also have a lot of shorter form tutorials on very specific subjects, but this is a pretty useful resource. All right, with that, let's dig into it. Our plan for today is to cover the event creation process from a high-level perspective. We'll start off by defining some terms within Service, and then we'll dive into the process of creating a normal event, as well as different tips for those who are newer or even those who've been with us for a longer time. Maybe haven't seen some of the newly added features. After that, we'll go through reviewing and managing existing events, including managing the list of registrants. And then we'll touch on a couple newer features: impact tracking, custom registration questions, and opportunity stickers. All right, so with that, we're going to start off again by defining some terms. So what I want to get into is creating opportunities first, and really what that language is in Service. So the first thing here is adding a new opportunity. We're going to talk about that today. In Service, the term opportunity is an umbrella term. Anything that refers to registrations or collecting registrations or collecting hours or recording activity, all of those fall under what we call opportunities. Within opportunities, we have three types. We have what we refer to as normal events, time slot events, and service projects. So normal and time slot events fall under the banner of what we would call an event. And the idea here is that these contain shifts. You are creating a start date and time and an end date and time that you're asking volunteers to register for. A normal event, which is what we're going to walk through creating today, is essentially a single shift. So let's say you have something happening this Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon, and you want to set that up as its own separate event. That would be a normal event. Time slot events are a bit of a variation on that. Time slot events allow you to create multiple shifts within a single event. So maybe you have 10 different positions happening, maybe on the same day or over the course of a weekend or a week, or maybe throughout the year. Maybe you have something that happens on a daily basis or a monthly basis. You could set up a time slot event to capture that kind of idea where you have a lot of different shifts within a single event. Service projects are the third type of opportunity. Service projects do not have dates and times associated with them. Instead, they have date ranges during which they're considered active. And while a project is active, volunteers can log activity into that project in the manner that you choose. So we're not going to be going through these today per se. We do have a webinar on this topic if you'd like to catch up on that. We also have a webinar on time slot events. Today we're going to be focusing on normal events. So again, in Service, the idea of a normal event, you could also call this a plain event. It's essentially a single shift. Now, before we kind of dig into all of this, I want to mention too, we went into creating a new opportunity, but you do have the ability to duplicate events in Service. So if you have the same thing happening from time to time, or maybe year over year, you could make a copy or duplicate a past version of that event and then work within that copy, essentially. So we'll look at that a little bit more later, but I like to mention that just to say, if you've already done something, you don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel. So as we're looking at creating an event, I want to kind of break this down by sections. If we look at this top section, so we're just going to scroll down a little bit here. This sort of ends with this Publish Online option. These top settings are really all that you need to create a pretty standard event where you don't necessarily have anything, anything specific or any other special needs for that particular opportunity. This contains things like the name of the opportunity, the description of the opportunity, which of course your volunteers see both of those items, the date and time of the event, the start time when volunteers should arrive, the end time when they'll be leaving. Of course, there can be some variance there, but this would be when volunteers are expected to be there for this shift. How many credit hours this event is worth. This is how many hours in total it's worth in length. Typically, this will match the start and end times. So if your event is from 9 a.m. to 12:30, then, it'll be 3.5 credit hours. So you'd write that in through there. This also has the number of volunteers needed, how many shifts are available for this event. So let's say you can take 15 people. You could write that number in here directly. You can turn on a wait list when you're creating a normal event as well. So if you want to, you can have the system, instead of marking an event as full, you can have it tell volunteers that there's a wait list available once the event fills up. And the system will manage this wait list automatically. So if a volunteer registers for the event and they're on the wait list because it was already full, then they'll just be in a position and they can actually see how many people are ahead of them on the wait list before they sign up. And then if someone cancels or if you expand the number of positions, then the system will automatically fill from the wait list. And when that happens, the volunteer will get a confirmation message, just like a volunteer who's signing up for the event normally. So all of these settings are kind of pretty straightforward. There's a few more in here that I just want to briefly touch on. We have the point of contact on the event. Typically, this might just be you. It could be someone who is essentially like a shift lead. This person has to have at least event leader access in service. They cannot just be a volunteer. So if you search for someone through here and you don't see them, that either means that they don't have an account or they have an account with not high enough access, meaning just a volunteer account. But that person is essentially a point of contact. There's some other special things we can do with that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But like I said, these first block of options are really just kind of the standard settings that you might need when you're setting up an event. We'll come back to some of these too in a moment here, but I want to briefly point out the other sections as we're kind of looking at this entire page. So the next block of options is additional organizer options. These have to do with who the organizer is, the point of contact on the event, and some settings pertaining to that person. Do they want to receive notifications of registrations or cancellations? When they print out a sign-in sheet, how much information do they want to see? Do they need to be able to modify the event? If you're not listing yourself as the point of contact for the event, if you're listing someone with event leader access, you might want to give them permission to edit the event. Right? So there's things like that in here that you can change that pertain to the organizers on the event. There's a block of options related to restrictions. We're going to come back to these in a moment. I want to kind of walk through this more fully. But if you need to restrict who is allowed to register for an event, this is where you would do that. And then there's another set of options called the advanced options. This is sort of a smattering of different things. We're not going to walk through all of these today, but we will touch on a couple of these items. These are more specific to certain scenarios. So if you don't want, if you have like a particular special event that has some kind of special things going on, a lot of times those settings are found in here. Like I said, we're going to come back through some of these things, but I'd encourage you, if you haven't already before, just scroll through this section. Read what the titles are. There's information boxes on a lot of these that will also give you more information about what that setting is or what it does. Okay, so again, going back to kind of the standard options, most of this stuff is pretty straightforward, right? You're setting things like where is the event taking place, the meeting location. You give that a title. You can also give it an actual physical address. So like a street address or cross streets or GPS coordinates, whatever you would put into Google, you can put into this field, and the system will actually query Google to create a map and send that to your volunteers. So pretty standard things through most of this. There are a couple items that I want to point out just as we're going through this. One thing you might have noticed is that next to the location and also next to the opportunity description, you have the ability to save field content, load field content, or delete field content. And then next to locations, you can also save location, load location, delete location. you'll see a trio of icons like this throughout Service. And essentially what these are allowing you to do is to create sort of templates for different pieces of information. Let's say, for example, you have a very common disclaimer or just kind of notice or volunteer code of conduct that you put at the bottom of every event. You could write that out one time, and then in here, click Save Field Content. And then whenever you want to reuse that, just click Load Field Content, pick from the list, and then load that in. And that would essentially just pull that information in, and then you can write on top of that some extra info. So if you have some things that are kind of like templates or language that you frequently use, again, you'll see a trio of icons like this throughout Service. For the location, it's exactly what you'd think. You can save the location name and the location address. So if you're frequently sending people to the same place, like a main warehouse or something, then this is a useful tool for saving and not having to rewrite that address all the time. Okay, a couple more things that I want to point out just in this first block of options. And again, a lot of these are pretty straightforward, but you have things like your reminder email. I kind of alluded to this earlier. When a volunteer registers for an event, they receive a confirmation message right away. That confirmation message contains all the details about the event that they've signed up for, including the date and time, the location, the point of contact, and all of that kind of information. The description of the event is also in there. The reminder email is a similar kind of email. It's just sent X number of days before the event, right? So you can choose 1 to 7 days or 2, 3, or 4 weeks ahead of time. You can also pick to have another reminder email, this additional automatic reminder email. This is the exact same content. This would just be like maybe you want to have one sent on a week before and one a day before, right? So you could select those independently here. Now, something else that's kind of important in this section is your interest categories. Your interest categories should typically represent the different programs that you have or the different locations that you operate out of. This is going to be unique to every single organization. So this is my demonstration console. Yours will not look like this exactly, and it shouldn't, right? It should represent what you are doing, what offerings you have, what types of programs, what locations you operate out of. And then when you create an event, you can select the appropriate category. I like to think of these like folders. When you create an event, you put it into an interest category, and that kind of files it away that way so that when you run reports, you can include everything within a singular folder or multiple folders. Okay, getting down towards the bottom here, the item that I want to focus on the most here is Publish Online. So this setting determines whether or not your event gets posted for volunteers to engage with. The default here is no, which means that volunteers will not see this opportunity unless you send them a direct invite to this event. So you can actually still create essentially private events and then invite certain volunteers to sign up for them by sending out a private event invite, or a direct registration code link is also what it's referred to. We'll look at that more in a moment. So there is some cause to sometimes leave the Publish Online setting to no. Otherwise, any of the yes options will allow volunteers to see this opportunity posted on your event listing page while it is open. So this opportunity status up here, Service will control this field for you. You typically don't need to make changes to that. Once the end time of an event passes, the system will automatically mark that as closed, and that essentially just pulls it down from your volunteer event listing page. So like I said, any of the yes options will post your opportunity, but only the yes open option will allow volunteers to register for the opportunity on their own. Typically, when you're creating an event, this is what you want to choose. Now, there are some other options in here, like posting something as coming soon or canceled or contact us, right? So there's some situations where those can be relevant. But typically, if you're creating an event and you want people to sign up for it, you want to post that as yes open. Now, you might have a scenario where you have an event upcoming and you do want to publish it, but you don't want registrations to be available yet. There's an option under the advanced options to schedule a posting date. By default, this date is this morning at 12:05 a.m. so that the system would basically just post the event right now as soon as you publish it. But you can post date an event or schedule a posting date. So let's say I want this to go live on Friday at noon. I could select that as my scheduled posting date, and then essentially the system will withhold this event until this date and time passes. and then the event would be made public or made available. Now, in that scenario, you would still want the publish online setting to be set to yes open, because the system will then withhold the event until that date and time passes. And how the system withholds that opportunity is actually a setting in your console. If we back up to the main dashboard here, under System Management, we have the system configuration. There's one setting that I want to point out in here under Opportunity Management Settings. You have the ability to post upcoming scheduled posting dates or events with an upcoming scheduled posting date as either coming soon or hidden. So if you're doing that scheduled posting date and you want the system to just hide the event until that date and time passes, you can choose that here. This is a global setting, so it affects all of your events. Or you can choose coming soon, and that would publish the event, but it would say coming soon, and volunteers wouldn't be allowed to register again until that date and time passes. Okay. All right. So again, just to reiterate, this first block of options is really all that you need to create an event and publish it online. You don't need to dig into the other settings unless you have specific needs that might drive you to do so. So let's actually talk about restrictions here. Let's say you have an event upcoming that does not allow volunteers under 14. Then the way restrictions work in Service, so how you would set that restriction, is by using an age restriction. If you do not see this option when you are creating an event, then you need to add birth date to your application, because that's how the system will track someone's age. But in here, I can see the age restriction, and I can essentially just set what my limits are. So the way restrictions work in Service is you select who is permitted to register, not who's prevented from registering. So if I want people who are between 14 and 150, 150 is the default for the end age, then that's what I would put in here, right? So I would just say that, and then the system will disallow any person who will not be 14 by the time of the event. And I said that very specifically. The way this restriction functions, the system tracks the birth date of the volunteer and kind of goes against the date of the event. So a 13-year-old could ostensibly sign up for this event as long as they will be 14 by the time of the event. So that's a simple example, an age restriction. But you can also set restrictions using background checks, using gender, using custom fields, using checklist items, and using groups. With those settings, you can really restrict by whatever you need to. You just need to make sure that that exists as some sort of framework in your console. Simple example, in my console, I ask people when they're creating a profile, are you completing court-ordered community service hours? And this is a yes or no question. So a volunteer answers this when they create a profile. I might have an event where I do accept court-ordered volunteers, but only after they've been vetted. The way that I would restrict that is to say, if someone said no to this question, I want them to be allowed to register. And then I have another question that is hidden. So you can see it says hidden field. And again, these are custom fields in my database. If you're not seeing this in your console, it's because you haven't made a question like this. But this question is a hidden field, so volunteers don't see it. And it says, if the volunteer is completing court-ordered community service, are they approved? Yes, no, or pending. I have this set to pending by default on every person. So when someone creates a profile, it's going to get marked as pending. And then when I go through and vet court-ordered volunteers, I can either mark them as yes, they're approved, or no, they're not. And so I could actually select yes here. And that means that when a volunteer is registering for this event, or if they're trying to register for this event, they either have to have said that they are not court-ordered, or I have to have said that they are approved. So if one of those two conditions is met, then they'll be allowed to register for this event. And that is based on this setting here that says require any or all of the custom field selections, and that's set to any by default. Just to be clear, if I set this to all, that would actually prevent basically any person from signing up for this event, because there really wouldn't be a scenario where someone would have said they're not court-ordered, but I would have vetted them as yes. That's not going to happen. I'm only changing this setting on people who are court-ordered, so it's important to leave that as any in this particular example. So again, you really can restrict by whatever you would like to. Very common to restrict by things like whether or not someone's completed a certain training or orientation, or if they've handed in certain paperwork or whatever else, or where they're at in a process, or if they're approved to do a certain type of work. All those things are very common to use as restrictions. The thing to remember is that the way restrictions work is you set who is permitted to register, not who's prevented. One other important aspect to this is when you are setting a restriction on an event, I almost always like to customize the failure message. If I just have an age restriction in place, or if you just have an age restriction in place, you don't need to change this field. Service will tell people if they don't meet an age requirement for an event, because that's not really sensitive information. But the rest of your restrictions could be sensitive information. Things like whether or not someone passed a background check. You might not necessarily want the system telling you, or telling your volunteers, hey, you didn't pass your background check, or things like that. So you can set a custom failure message here, which I like to give people next steps. So in this case, I'm using an age restriction. I don't really need to note that in the custom failure message because there's already a note about that. But I do need to note something about court-ordered volunteers, right? So I might put in here a message saying, thanks for your interest. If you are a court-ordered volunteer or if you're completing court-ordered community service hours, you need to have been approved first. Contact Bruce for more information, right? I like to give people a next step. So instead of just telling them thanks but no thanks, it actually gives them something else to do. And that might be going and signing up for a different opportunity or signing up for a training or signing up for or even just contacting with more information or whatever else. Okay, so those are restrictions. And any advanced options, I don't really want to dig into any of this right now. We're going to come back to a couple of these things. But like I said, I think it's important to just glance through here, especially if you're newer to the system or if you haven't seen some of these things, just to make sure you know what exists as options. We'll come back through some of these things in a minute because we're going to talk about some of those newer features that have been added, and some of those are accessed or engaged here. Okay, so that is kind of setting up a pretty standard event. We're going to back up and go into managing opportunities next. So that's going to take place under the Opportunity Management heading in Search and Manage Existing Opportunities. If we go into this menu, this page by default displays all of your current open opportunities. I mentioned earlier, Service will close opportunities after the end time passes. So what this page is showing you by default is all of your events that are ongoing or upcoming. If you would like to see something in particular, you can search for it by name, you can search by organizer or keyword or tags. You can also do a quick search for closed opportunities or only my opportunities, which would show you anyone where you are a point of contact. And then there's also an advanced search tool to run a search for events using a bunch of other criteria. So if you're looking for a specific set of events, you can do that. But the default view for this page is all of your current open events. Now, when you're looking at these events, the leftmost icon is sort of like a main menu option, and the other options next to that are shortcuts. So this event that we're looking at here, that I'm mousing over, is a normal event. We can tell that by the color of this calendar icon, and when I mouse over it, it says opportunity type normal. The other options we have here are to update the event, register volunteers, or manage custom registration questions. But the leftmost icon is sort of like the main menu. If I click into this, we can see all of the details about this event. And we can make changes to the event itself. We can update the event. We can manage registrations. There's a bunch of printouts you can create through here. I alluded earlier to the idea of a private registration code. That's found in here also. If we click on this, you can see that there's two different sort of link options here. And if we copy this out, I'm actually just going to open up an incognito and go to that link. That will take us straight to the registration page for that event. So even if this event was not posted publicly, you can still invite people to sign up for it by sending them a link like that. Okay, but also on this page, one of the really important things is managing registrations, right? So if we go in here to register volunteers or view registered volunteers, this would be where I engage with the list of attendees for this event. So all the people who have signed up will be listed here. At the top of the page, I can add people in. So if I want to search for someone by name and add them to this event, I can do so. If I need to adjust any of these registrations, I can also take those actions on this page. So if I want to go and remove someone who's registered, I can select them from here down at the bottom, click on unregister. There's also some other kind of like emailing options in here. You can send an email to the list of attendees. Let's say the time has shifted or just want people to be aware of a weather delay or whatever else, you can always send an email through here. One important thing to note, this is actually just kind of a general rule of thumb in Service. When you as an admin are taking an action, it will not send email notifications on your behalf. Service will not send emails on your behalf unless you are clicking a button that actually says send email. So I just registered a volunteer for this event from the admin side. That person did not get a confirmation message. If I want that person to receive a confirmation message, I would select their registration. And then down at the bottom, I can either send a manual confirmation email or the automatic confirmation email. They are both the same content. It's just if I want to make changes to it while I'm sending it out, I would use manual. If I just want to send it straight away, I would use automatic. Okay, a couple of the things as we're looking at this list of attendees. The leftmost icon, this calendar icon, will tell you when this person was registered and by whom. So you can actually see if they signed themselves up or if a staff member signed them up. So you can see that information listed here. And you can also click on this calendar icon to adjust someone's activity. Let's say this person left early and I want to give them half an hour less of credit or an hour less of credit. I can go and adjust that independently through here, and that would only affect that one person. It wouldn't affect anyone else who's registered. So again, we accomplish that just by clicking on the calendar icon here. And if I click on it again, it'll tell me how many hours this person is receiving. If I leave this blank, then that would give them the default for the event, just like everyone else. One of the other things going on this event, and you may have spotted it as I was registering, is I have custom registration questions turned on for this event. In particular, I ask someone if they can speak Spanish when they're registering. That's not a question on my general application. I'm more interested in that in this particular event. So I have what is called a custom registration question turned on for this event. So when someone registers, before they complete their registration, they must answer that question. And that particular question is pretty simple. It's just a yes/no question. But questions like this, again, are referred to as custom registration questions. And if we back up, so this is the main menu for this particular event again. There is a menu item for managing custom registration questions. And in this menu, I can see all of the custom registration questions that I've created previously. And I can choose to employ those in this event if I want to. So we can see that only the Spanish-speaking question is selected currently, but maybe I also needed people to give me a reference name and number. I could select those questions too, and then you can also drag and drop these to change the order of how they're presented when someone is signing up for this event, answering these questions. Now to add questions to this list, at the bottom right, I can just click on Manage Registration Question Inventory. Again, we got to this page directly through a particular event. So every event will have this option, and you can go in here, click on Manage Registration Question Inventory, and then you can essentially build out, let me go back there. You can build out new questions using the different type options. So you can make it like a selection box like I did for that Spanish-speaking question. You could ask for a line of text, an email address, a date, or number, a phone number, so all sorts of options there. These questions can have required answers if they are a selection box. So that Spanish-speaking question is not a required answer in that event, but I could make it so that someone has to say yes in order to sign up for that event. So if I select that question and I update this, it is actually set to yes as a required answer. So basically, when someone signs up for that event, they have to say yes to this question. If they say no, they'll see this failure message. And they won't be able to sign up for that event. So these questions can be restrictive, or they can just be collecting information. You don't necessarily have to make restrictive questions there, like the reference name and number. If I'm having people apply for like an internship or an office aide position, maybe I need that kind of data where I wouldn't normally need that. That's not restrictive per se, but I'm just using that to collect extra information. So those are custom registration questions, and again, every event can have those employed. And then one other kind of newer feature that I want to talk about, we should have two more to talk about today. One is opportunity stickers, and you can actually see those on this page. So every event in Service can have any number of tags associated with it. Tags are a way for you to categorize your events on the back end. But then you can also publish those tags as stickers for volunteers to engage with. So we can see, like that Zoo Wings event that I had, it says that this is a translation event, or it's family friendly, it's wheelchair accessible. These are all tags that I have created. So if I go in to manage this opportunity, at the top of the page here, you can see all these tags. Let's say I wanted to add something else in here to say that this is a group friendly event. I can click on add opportunity tag and then just start typing. If it's a tag that I've created previously, that'll pop up. If not, then I would just need to write it out, right? But once you've created a tag, it'll start getting suggested. And then those tags, again, could be just internal. If you don't want volunteers to see it, that's the default state. But on the left-hand side here, there's this tag cloud option. And in here, we can go and add stickers to these different options. And those basically make it transparent or public-facing for volunteers, or we can choose to do that. So ultimately, what a volunteer sees, I'm going to log out here and go to the event listing page. This is how volunteers see your opportunities. If you have stickers posted, those will show up on the card for the event. So when a volunteer is looking at your events, they can see all those stickers. And if they want to filter by those, you have the option to make these searchable. And essentially, a volunteer can just click on that. And then that will filter this page to display all the events with that particular sticker. Okay, I do want to mention too, we have a webinar on that subject. So if you'd like to learn more about creating those stickers, how to set those up, how to use those, maybe some ideas for what to do with that, that webinar is a good resource. Okay, and there's one more item that I wanted to talk about today when creating events. Kind of another tip is that you can use impact tracking to record additional numerical metrics. So when you are having volunteers sign out from a shift, they could also record things like what they did during that shift. You know, if you have like a cleanup event, how many pounds of trash did you pick up? How many bags of trash did you pick up? If you have like a meal service event, how many meals did you serve? If you have some kind of like booth event where volunteers are engaging with customers or clients, you know, you could have them write down metrics about how many of this type of conversation they had or that type of thing. Impact tracking is very flexible in terms of what you use it for. A lot of times it's going to be things that you need to be able to report on. Maybe you have some grant writing that you do based on some of these metrics. Those are obviously good examples, but you can also use impact tracking more internally to have volunteers give things like shift ratings. So I have this rate your shift experience as an impact tracking metric. This is only employed when I select it. So when I create an opportunity, under the advanced options, there's a menu here that says impact tracking items associated with this opportunity. So if I wanted to use that rate your shift experience, I would select that. Or maybe I want to use grocery bags or bags of trash removed. And then I can tell the system, how do I want volunteers to record this information, or do I want volunteers to record this information? You can just record these pieces of data on the back end. You can say admin only, and then volunteers don't see this. They're not going to engage with that data. The other options, online, on-site, or both, are ways for volunteers to engage with these metrics and give you these numbers. If you choose online, the way I think about that is it's retroactive. So after a volunteer serves their shift, they can log in to their account from home, at work, on their phone, whatever, and they can record those metrics. So they could say, I removed this many bags of trash, I prepared this many grocery bags, I drove this many miles, whatever it may be. But it's retroactive, so they're doing it after their shift, but they're logging in later and doing that. On-site would be something where the volunteer is recording that actually in the moment when they leave their shift. So when they sign out from their shift using the sign-in console, which we did just do a webinar on that subject as well. But when they sign out, you could have them record those metrics as soon as they sign out. And I typically like to do it this way whenever I can, because then I'm not asking people to remember that stuff and tell me later. They're just recording it in the moment when they actually leave from that shift. I think especially for things like asking people to rate their shifts or having other metrics like this that you're having them record, it's a lot easier to get those numbers when they're leaving or walking out the door rather than, a week later when they might not remember as much. Okay, so that's kind of enabling impact tracking metrics. When impact tracking is turned on for an event, you will see that when you look to manage that particular event. If we go into view the registered volunteers, on this screen on the right-hand side, you'll see that same icon for impact tracking. And in here, if impact has been recorded, this icon will be gold. If not, it'll be black by default. But you can click on that and you can record those numbers through here on the admin side. Or if someone has recorded that data, you can click to review that information here. And then, of course, these can be reported alongside your hours when you're doing your general reporting in the report management menu. In particular, this custom participation report, you can select to include any of those impact tracking metrics when you run a report. Okay, well, we went through a lot of data today here. We talked through kind of start to finish setting up an event, different tips and features that have been added recently. If you have any direct questions about what we covered or even something we did not cover, please feel free to write into our customer support team by using the Need Help button at the bottom of the page when you're logged in. When you're in here, you can just type in a term. Let's say you want to learn more about impact tracking. You can search for that term here. That'll show you any articles that have to do with that. You can also click on Contact Us and submit a ticket to our customer support team. They'll get back to you right away. Other than that, I want to reiterate that we have all of our past recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. If you go to video.servicetech.com, you'll be brought to this page. We have a lot of webinars on some of the topics that we talked about today, like the sign-in console, or impact tracking, or time slots. I kind of mentioned we did that, and service projects. So some of those things, if you want to deep dive into more of those subjects, this is a good resource as well. All right. Well, that kind of does it for our time here today. It looks like most of the questions that were asked were more unique to organizations. So if you do have more questions, again, feel free to write into our customer support team. But thank you so much for joining today. It's always a pleasure to see you all. We are grateful that we get to partner with you and serve in the communities that you're working in. So thanks for your time today. Hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday.